Hello, everyone. Thanks again for joining us. My name is Mauricio Elwin. I am your Coherent digital representative out in the West. I just started with Coherent, and what I'm going to be talking about today is partly the reason why I started with them. I believe very much in both the technology and the mission and values of this company, and I'm happy to represent them and to just inform you all today about what makes Coherent coherent. So no puns intended, the first slide is really what makes Coherent different. And I have to say, Coherent is very different from a lot of the companies that you've seen out there. We are 4 years old, well, 5 years old, started in 2020. And really what we've been working on is unmatched and is desperately needed, I feel, in academia. Our tagline is, we tame wild content and make it useful. And then we usually start with this slide, which for many of you may be familiar with. It is a representation of the internet from 1992. The idea being that it was meant to connect researchers to the research they needed, and in doing so would vastly increase the rate of progress across all fields and in all research across the globe. We've been, I think, a little sidetracked in terms of how big the internet has become and all the different use cases for what the internet is capable of. But in our business, we are still with that same vision of trying to get the content that's needed, the research that's needed in all the different nodes across the globe into the hands of the researchers that can make use of it and vastly expedite the progress of research as we know it. And that's really what Coherent's all about. When we talk about wild content, what we're talking about is all that really useful content around the globe that is not finding its way into the academia. This slide kind of depicts that. So what's tame or what's current in terms of people's budgets, in terms of what people are purchasing, are the traditional journals, books, preprints, all of that media that we all know, and that really take up about 99 to 100% of our budgets. Now, this is all wonderful content, but it does not really tell the whole picture. It's not research in the field. It's not what decision makers use when they're creating legislation. It's not what decision makers use when they're deciding on a recourse for local governments. And it doesn't really tell the whole story. It's telling the story that's found its way into the curated record, but not the story as told by people in their own voices. And that's what really Coherent is trying to do. We're going after all that content that's out there that is telling the story in their own voices. That is the research in the field, the application in the field, the case study in the field. And we're also going for those undigitized resources in many parts of the world where really they just haven't had the resources to digitize that content. And so those voices have been silent for a really long time. And this is how we do it. This is a very large oversimplification of what our process is, but it begins with curation and bots. We have machine learning that goes out, crawls sites, make sure that there is copyright enabled. And then we work with a number of editors to make sure that we're going after organizations that are representative of their specific fields. And so it's this mix of human and machine interaction to really figure out where that content resides as quickly as possible, but also to make sure that we are getting the best content and that we are making sure that it is vetted content. Next is the enriching process. And here's really the secret sauce of it all, in the sense that we index everything that's out there. So that may seem like a very simple thing to do, but it really isn't, because it really, to the point that we are processing somewhere north of 650 items per hour. We're adding fields to that, mapping it, and just really adding all the metadata that makes that information useful to researchers and to academics, and preserves the record. The next is making it accessible to the researchers themselves, and this requires a lot of tools, least of which is not fault-tolerant discovery, making sure that when they're putting in their search criteria, they're actually coming up with results that are useful for them, and that are tagging to the things that they are interested in taking a look at. And the last part is just engaging. You know, as we increase our process, as we increase the amount of information that we're bringing in, it's bringing that traffic, the readers, the usage, everything that they were really searching for. And to that extent, we are very open to taking suggestions about organizations, about areas, or about undiscovered or undigitized collections that haven't seen the light of day in some time and would be really useful to the community. So what's our value add? Well, it's discovery, first and foremost. We make this content not just found, but we make it easily found and easily used from all over the world, and from areas that have not had quite the voice that they should have for a very long time. We verify the information as well. So whether it's peer reviewed or whether it's coming from established think tanks, NGOs, where they are staking their reputation on their content, we make sure that all of that content is useful. We create tools and metadata for this, least of which is not the content object identifier, which we've coined as koi, and that's why it's shaped like a little koi fish. And the beauty of this was, you know, we went to the folks with DOIs knowing that we needed to have a permanent link, permanent record for every item that we're adding to the database from all over the world. And given the mass that are, given the volume with which we work, that seemed to be really difficult for the folks at DOIs, specifically just the cost of putting that together was going to be astronomical and not viable. And so Coherent really developed their own system, developed a KOI, which is a PID, a permanent identifier. And what it does is it creates a permalink to every item that we have on this that we bring into the database. And when, for whatever reason, there is something that we cannot preserve, we do have a tombstone record or a shadow record of that, so that that object is never lost. Its identity is always preserved. And lastly, we do preservation efforts. Anytime rights are permitting, that whatever information becomes at risk, and this is for various reasons, right? This can be a takedown from a government. This can be a lack of funding that leads to the closure of an NGO. This could be, simply speaking, technical issues. We make sure that that record is preserved. We create a copy where we can. Where we can't, we link back out to the sites. So the main point here being that we are at all times trying to keep that record consistent. And what this leads to has been some rather large growth. We have primary source records, a lot of digitized content that hadn't seen the light of day before, in addition to our social justice collections, which is really more of a living, breathing database. What I mean by that is there is an archival component to it, but there is also constantly added content about the advocacy in these areas by the leaders and the organizations that are promoting that advocacy. And we work with various organizations around the world to bring that information so that you're getting a real record, real-time record of that information, and really understanding the struggles and the advocacy in those areas. Same comes for our global studies collections. We have our archival portions that are brought about by organizations in the regions that they are serving. And we have the active part, the living, breathing part, which is really information as it is coming in, and all the various meta facets that you could imagine, everything from oral histories to blogs, to video, to what's happening in the real world. There is a slight caveat with some of our Global South collections as well. So with the sale of each of those collections, we take 10% of the proceeds towards developing digitization efforts in those areas with folks on the ground there, so that, again, they are able to tell their story in their own voice, and we are assisting in that process. And last but not least, we have our gray literature collection, working with think tanks, governments, and previously undigitized records of North American cities, as well as some of the hottest topics that are out there now, like environmental science and computer and AI. The idea here is bringing in that real-time research as it's happening alongside the archival record, so we have a full history as well as a connection to the current science. I think one of the most unique aspects of Coherent Digital is the fact that we work so globally. Again, we are not curating information and then bringing it into our own database, but rather letting folks tell the story in their own voice all around the world, and allowing for that voice to be heard for the first time in academia in a way that it never has been before. That said, it's current information. It's information that we all need. It's produced by organizations on the ground, and it's at a volume that is very, very difficult to track without some kind of advanced technology like the one that Coherent has established. So this is, in addition to the academic record, but the real actual case studies on the ground, the application of the science. And what's even more surprising is that it really is information that is not covered. So we do not have this in our traditional databases. And a lot of this information that is incredibly useful and that many of you may have actually sought out on your own in smaller scale, doesn't find its way very often into the academy. It really is a struggle to make those connections with that real-time science, despite the fact that a lot of the folks that are graduating from these universities are going into these fields and actually using these applications moving forward. So there is really a lack in training, I think, between what is happening in the real world and how it's being delivered into the academy. And again, is it reference? Is it impactful? Absolutely. This slide in particular really shocked me when first time I saw it, and that's that, at COP26, there was only one journal article that was used. The rest was all gray literature. And when you think of all the think tanks and all the NGOs and all the government institutions that are being cited in most of our media, they're coming from gray literature. They're not coming from the academy. For the most part, it just has to do with timing, right? I mean, this is, again, that research on the ground in real time that is needed to make decisions in real time. And so that is why it is being pulled from those sources. For those that are doing systemic review or impact studies, there's a lot that's being missed, up to 40% really, when you think of all of the content that's out there. Again, a real world science that's just not making its way in, and is not currently indexed with the tools that you have. Same for impact studies, right? Here's an example of just such an impact study. It had 6 reports that were missing, broken links that you couldn't even verify the source. And despite those non-traditional sources being cited, there's no permanent identifier, so you can bring them up if you needed to. If you were using, for instance, Policy Commons for something like this, all of those would have a COI, all of those would be cited, and we have a tool that actually creates tracks all of that information, tracks mentions across, so you could really use it to decide whatever impact study you were trying to establish. The other thing that's slightly different about Coherent, we have, you saw there with the gray literature, two databases. One was Policy Commons, the other one being our Applied Science Commons. And yet, in both of those, they really are cross-disciplinary. You're going to find in Policy Commons information on energy, information on urban studies, information on area studies, just as you are with applied sciences, information on economics or public affairs or international trade. Because we're pulling from NGOs and we're pulling from, again, the science on the ground, the real world is mixed, right? We're not talking about one thing in one place. We're talking about really a mixture of science and economics and politics and people. And so all of those institutions are represented in our collections. So again, to recap, is it important? In a lot of cases, it's ranked as most important by researchers. Is it high quality? Aside from the fact that a lot of it is peer reviewed, that most of it is peer reviewed, it's tested. It's tested in the field. It's what it actually is used to make decisions on a large scale. And it's large. 1.5 million new reports a year, covering, as I said, all across different discipline areas, covering more in media than books and journals, and growing faster every day. Why it's not used more? I mean, there's a host of different reasons why, but I would say the biggest are its lack of discovery, and its lack of tools. It's really hard to not just bring that in or find all of this information, but once you find it, to break it down into what's useful and what's not useful. And really what Coherent Digital does so expertly is make that process intuitive and simple. And here's where we are so far. We've covered our history commons. The first part was establishing, again, those primary sources, that historical record. And now we're moving on to our living collections, which are a mixture of archive as well as a growing collection that is looking at advocacy in these areas in real time. We have our global studies as well, starting with South Asia Commons, where we've just completed the Iran Society of India Digital Archive, and that was funded directly from that 10% of the proceeds that I mentioned. We work with them to make that freely available, again, so those voices are heard, which had previously not been. In Africa Commons as well, we do the same, as well as in Latin America Commons and Canada Commons. And then we have our Policy Commons, which is really our initial start, where we started with our global think tanks and built into government, as well as local and international government. And we are growing that collection by leaps and bounds really every year. And then our Applied Science Commons, which is launching later this month, bringing in computer science and data and AI, as well as applied environmental sciences. And really we'll be continuing to grow later this year with civil engineering, and as well as mental health. So going back to the original question, what makes Coherent different? Well, really, it's all those things, right? It's the technology that we use to enable a different type of research. It is the ease with which the researcher is enabled to do their science. And it's the fact that we bring out voices that are either at risk of being silenced or had not previously been heard. And to that effect, we really do put our efforts where our values stand. To that end, we've launched this Rescue to Open collection, Policy Commons 2025 Open Collection, whose work is really to index and preserve the record for a lot of the government information that has been recently disappearing, least of which is not US aid information. And we're paying for it directly from the proceeds of our current Policy Commons resource. So this is coming directly from our own growth. So if you find that that is a useful resource and decide to move forward with it, know that it is also making a contribution towards these efforts. And we will officially launch the first 100,000 items at ERNL next week. So please look out for that because we are very excited and very proud to be able to make this available. And with that, are there any questions I can answer for anyone? A question in the chat. Oh, no.
Questions in the chat so far. And just to confirm, we did not receive any questions ahead of time. So if there are none from the group, going once, going twice. I would say, Mauricio, you're off the hook. There are no questions for now, but if I get
Sounds
anything, I will definitely forward those along to you.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say is just that we do have an offer available through the Alliance. So please take a look at the offer. If any of this information is of interest, or if you'd like to explore any of these collections, you can also just reach out to me. I'm happy to set up any trials or provide any demos or deeper dives into any aspect. I realize that we have a rather large portfolio at this point, and I'm happy to help you navigate it as easily as possible.
I'm gonna stop the recording now.